We are at Rhoda Shalom Synagogue, and this is Shell Wicker, who is going to take us through a lot of history, starting with here. And if you can let us know what this wall is and what it represents.
Okay. These are memorial walls where deceased congregants, families have purchased a plate in memory of them, and the plates have both the English and Hebrew name and the date of death in both Hebrew and English.
And can you tell us what the Hebrew name is on there?
The Hebrew name, Ethel Bat, because it's Ethel is my mother's Hebrew name. Bat is daughter of, and because these don't have vowels on them, it's hard to it's hard for me to read some of this, but I know this is her Hebrew name, Ethel, daughter of, and then of, I know this is Labe, so her father's Hebrew name is very long. So.
All right, so Shell, if you can explain to Cindy.
I was explaining to Cindy that the Hebrew writing, if it's your native language, the vowels aren't like in their newspapers or their books because they know the language and they can read without the vowels. And the vowels look different from the letters. They're usually like a series of dots or a little symbol that looks like a plus, but they are like vowel sounds like we would have, kind of A, E, I, O, U kinds of sounds. But if you're familiar with the Hebrew language, you can read it without the vowels. But it's almost like you have to be fluent. In certain words, I can read all of this, but I'm not a conversational speaker. So this is easier for me to read than
and it
scripture.
Goes that way.
Yeah, you read from right to left
Right
instead
to
of left to right, like the
Okay.
English language.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Okay,
What you're looking at right here is the Torah, which contains the 5 books of Moses, which is the main part of the Jewish Bible that we study from. But the Jewish Bible does have 2 other parts, the prophets and writings. But we focus on the first 5 books of the Bible. And those are contained in the Torah, and they're read weekly during our services on a triennial, which means it takes 3 years to read the entire Torah. They don't read every Torah portion in entirety. They do it on what's called a triennial. But they are taken out for services on Saturdays, on the Sabbath, but also during the weekdays on Mondays and Thursdays. And they are in an ark. They are contained in the ark, the Holy Ark.
So the whole wooden structure is the ark.
Mm-hmm. And there is an ark in there as well, and more Torahs in there. This is just a smaller, version. So, yeah. I know there's so much. I could talk for hours because I know so much.
So-
It's interesting.
Yeah.
so we're going to get into the history of how Jewish people came over into this country and anything that you would like to talk about from our own personal family.
All right. So what I'm going to start with talking about like our family and what I know about our family. Heather and I, our cousins, our grandparents, her grandfather, my grandmother, sister and brother, and their mother, our great-grandmother, actually came at the turn of the century in the early 1900s. She had a sister that had already come, that was in New York City, and she was very young. I want to say around 18. I think she was around 18, and her sister encouraged her to come, and she made that journey by herself. No other members of our family came. And what we know, of course, they perished during,
What country did
we're
they
quite sure
immigrate?
they came from Russia. I thought,
Okay.
yeah, they came from Russia, and we are quite sure the rest of our family was killed during the Holocaust. And they were Russian, but the Russians were also fighting against the Germans. But Jews were heavily persecuted in areas of Russia too, as far as being able to practice their religion. And her sister encouraged her to come, and I think her husband, our great-grandfather, who we didn't know, but luckily our great-grandmother lived to 90, or almost 90. So she died in 1987. She met him in New York. So he had also come from Russia as well. So that's kind of a little bit of our family history, whereas many Jews did not immigrate to this country until after World War II. The ones that survived, some went to Israel, and eventually some, came to America. But there was also, Jewish immigrants as early as, the start of America times as well. And, even here in Tampa, there were early Jewish immigrants, where some of the buildings in Ybor City actually have the names of the families that had businesses down there. So,
Yes, I did a cultural event a few weeks ago in Ybor City, and they were talking about how Jewish people were very active in Ybor City back in the 1800s.
but it's highly unusual where someone mine and Heather's age, grandparents were born in America, because the majority of Jews or practicing Jews that you meet, like some of them either don't have grandparents because they perished in the Holocaust, and a lot of my Jewish friends that I grew up with, grandparents were Holocaust survivors, whereas because our great-grandmother came at the turn of the century, our grandparents were actually born in New York. And a lot of Jewish people of our generation are not as fortunate as we are to have had generations, at one time even 5 generations alive in our family. That's very rare in a Jewish family because of the Holocaust. So if our great-grandmother had not come over, and her sister hadn't encouraged her, we may not be here. So we were pretty lucky.
And you're talking about Fanny?
Yes, Grandma Fanny, our great-grandmother. Yes.
And is there things about the synagogue here? Because I know our family through the years has been very active in the synagogue, and it's one of the oldest ones that I know of. Things that our family have done in the synagogue and known for.
Right, and we can go out in a minute. You can even take pictures. There is even a menu. Our great-grandmother, when she came over, actually when she moved to Tampa, what she did, she came in and came to Tampa in the 1940s, is when our family moved from New York to Tampa in the 1940s. She bought a home, and it became like a boarding house, and she had a kosher-style restaurant, which was also very rare in Tampa in the 1940s. And she loved to cook, so she started doing catering, and she catered Passover, meals that congregants could buy. And we can go out in the hallway because one of those menus is there with her name on it. Did you see that?
I did.
You were out there? Did you take a picture of it already?
I took a picture of the smaller picture.
Yeah. So, and our family has been very involved. My grandmother, I know my great-grandmother's sister was a sisterhood president, which is the women's organization, and there is also a men's club where I believe I was thinking it was your father, but now your grandfather, but I think it's my grandfather whose picture is also in the social hall. So, but the synagogue was founded before our family came in the 1940s, because we've already had our 100-year celebration of this synagogue. Probably already, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago. So this actual congregation was founded over 100 years ago. So, but our family has been members since the 1940s when they came from New York, which is pretty well.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit from birth to death, what somebody of the Jewish faith goes through, and things in the holidays and what they mean?
Okay, so kind of like the what's the word I'm looking for?
From if you're a boy starting out being circumcised
those
and
ages,
right.
Yeah, so of course Jewish boys from the start of birth have a ritual ceremony and girls do too, just not quite. The boys have what's called a bris, and circumcision is mandated by the Torah, and so Jewish boys go through the ceremony where they're circumcised, and not like in a hospital where you can't do it in the hospital if you're going to do this. Well, I guess you could actually have a bris in the hospital if the baby was sick, or if the baby's sick, you can wait. But basically, it's the circumcision, and the baby's given their name, and
Their Hebrew name.
Their Hebrew name is and they are, and that is on the 7th day of their life that you have the bris. And then for girls, they do baby namings, and it's not as specific as when you do that baby naming for girls. Typically, it's within the first year, and usually you bring them, and like my daughters were named like during actually one of them was named during the service, but because my mother was so ill that when my other granddaughter was born, we actually did it at my parents' house, and the rabbi came to our house. So, and same thing with the bris, you can do it a lot of them are done in the homes. In the old days, they were mostly done in the homes. Now sometimes people come to the synagogue, and there is a person that has to be certified as what's called a moil, and sometimes it's a doctor. Sometimes, like the moil for my grandsons was a nurse practitioner. Sometimes it's not even a medical doctor, but it's somebody who was trained in the procedure, and they are certified. So, and sometimes they often are better than some of the doctors because they are trained to do that circumcision. So that's from birth, and then. Students that would like to have a bar mitzvah for a boy or a bat mitzvah for a girl usually begin formal Hebrew school where they're actually learning the Hebrew language in 3rd grade, but we also have religious education that starts as early as pre-K and kindergarten now. So my kids started in kindergarten, and they are starting to expose the kids at a younger age to the Hebrew alphabet, just basically, But then once they are in 3rd grade, can change from Reform to Conservative to Orthodox, because my dad studied in 6 months and learned his bar mitzvah. But in the secular kind of world we live in now, the kids are going to learn better if they start Hebrew school, and then at the age of 13, around the age, it has to be 13 for the boy. Girls can do it any time in their 13th year. They have a bar mitzvah, which culminates all that they've learned, and they lead the service and do a Torah portion.
Well, you actually just mentioned it for the students in our class that doesn't know the difference. Can you tell everybody the difference between Reformed, Orthodox, and Conservative?
Right. Reformed is probably the least traditional in their practices of how their services. If you were to go to a conservative service and a Orthodox, the services are going to be very similar. But the Orthodox follow the letter of the law of the Torah in the secular world too, in their education, in their daily living. If you are Orthodox, you observe, the Sabbath fully. You stop working at noon and you prepare for the Sabbath, and you're in synagogue and praying. Whereas conservative, while our services are by the book, kind of by the Torah, and mostly in Hebrew, like the Orthodox, more of the conservative Jews, and conservative is confusing because people hear that word conservative and they think it's the most rigid and but it's conservative in the way we follow the Torah while we're in the temple. A lot of conservative Jews outside the temple follow all the rules and they keep kosher and they observe Sabbath, but a lot don't. Whereas Reform, they reform it to fit the modern world. That's where Reform Judaism came out, because the majority of Jews in this country are Reformed, and even back during World War II, a lot of European Jews were Reformed, so they reformed it to kind of fit the modern world.
So kind of like Share Zedek is more.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot more English in their service. While they do Hebrew and they do the basic prayers, you're going to hear more English in their service. They do not observe the dietary laws inside their temple, because Jews that are very traditional, all Orthodox Jews pretty much keep kosher, and there are certain dietary laws that they observe, and we're all conservative. Like, I'm a conservative Jew, and I don't keep kosher, but yeah,
Nobody
but I-
needs to know
no,
that.
But that's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. But you know, you do what you can. It's I won't say it's difficult so much to observe dietary law. It's it is more expensive to keep kosher, and the dietary laws would be a whole
Right, and
long
just like
lesson.
quickly, just in the short version, again, could you let everybody know what it means to have a kosher kitchen?
Yeah. Okay. So and what you have to remember is Jews just don't arbitrarily do these things. Everything that they do is in the Torah. I mean, it's written in the Torah, or the interpretation of why we don't eat, certain animals. It says that animals have to chew their cud and have cloven hooves. So that's why we don't eat, any pork, anything from a pig. So, it have, cows and, typically cows, chickens, fish are all okay. But then there's also a commandment on the way the animal is killed in the least amount of suffering. So there's a very specific way to kill the animal. So kosher meat not only has to be certain animals, but it has to be killed a certain way as well. And then never is dairy mixed with meat. So you can never have like a cheeseburger, because you can't have a dairy product with a meat product. And again, there's an interpretation in the Torah as to why you can't do that. There are certain foods that are what they call parv. They're neither meat nor dairy. So like fish is considered parv. So you can eat fish with dairy products. It's not like a meat but you can't eat like chicken or beef or lamb or those other animals that we're allowed to eat. And then Passover, which is a major holiday coming up soon, has a whole other set of dietary laws. And for 1 week, there's a whole bunch of things you can't eat during Passover, because of the bread, and the bread not being time to leaven. So all kinds of bread products aren't allowed. And people that are very strict kosher have a set of dishes that they only use on Passover once a year. So.
And what are some of the other holidays?
Okay, and so what a lot of people don't realize is our major holiday is not Hanukkah. It's a very minor holiday in the Jewish religion, but since it happens to fall around the time of Christmas, and it's become, commercialized, and, people are capitalizing on, that, spending money. It's a very minor holiday. Our major holidays are what's called the high holidays, and it begins with Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And then after Rosh Hashanah, 10 days later, is Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, where we ask God for forgiveness for our sins and kind of, cleanse ourselves of, and start the new year off to, do, things better and right. And then after Yom Kippur, there is Sukkot, which is kind of like a fall harvest holiday. So Judaism has three harvest holidays. So basically, it is, we're thanking God for, providing us this food, and that happens in every season. So so Sukkot is a pretty big holiday. That's why they're all called the high holidays, because it's a series of 5 holidays. And then there's Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, and it's when we start over again reading the Torah. We'll start again with Genesis. So those are the biggest holiday, and they typically are around September, October, in the fall season. And then Passover is the other major holiday in our religion, which is coming up soon, April 10th, and that is usually in the spring. And there is a Jewish calendar, so that's why the Jewish holidays change. It's a lunar calendar. It's done by the moon. So that's why the holidays are not like, where Christmas every year is December 25th. It's not like that in the Jewish religion. They're around the same time, but it's by a lunar calendar. And so.
On the Jewish calendar, speaking of, what year is it now? Or do you think?
50, no, I know it's
Okay.
57, 70 something. I forget the number. If it's in the 5,000s. Yeah.
I always thought it was in
57, 70 something. I would have to look at the calendar. Yeah, exact. But yeah.
And
Remember, it's biblical times from when the Old Testament was written, so it's old. Yeah, so the calendar started. I know it's because I have a calendar. We could probably find one. I know I have one at home, but I'm sure they have some here.
And can we talk about like a couple of traditions? Like I know some people ask, why do Jewish people rip their clothing?
Okay, when someone in the family dies, the first thing you do, is, and typically it's 7 people that you would do this for: a mother, a father, a child, a sibling, a spouse. It's like immediate family members, and when that person dies, it's just a symbolic of you're going into mourning. So they rip their clothing. So nowadays you'll see, if you've been to a Jewish funeral, they give the people a black ribbon that's torn. But very traditional, ultra-Orthodox people wear, as soon as that person dies, whatever clothing they have on, they'll rip. And then during that period of mourning, you're supposed to 7 days, of Shiva, where you're not supposed to. Really, in the old days, they used to sit on crates and boxes and not a comfortable spot, just to mourn that loss.
Where you have a candle lit and you.
Okay, there's a Yorkshire. Okay, another way to honor or memorialize a person that's died, and it's again, all of this is written in the Torah, so it kind of tells you there's very specific things with every, like you said, milestone in life, with birth, with death, with marriage. Marriage has a whole other set of things. But anyway, you light what's called a Yorkshire candle, and when the person first dies, you light it, and it burns for 24 hours. Then on the anniversary of their death, you're supposed to burn the candle too. And they do sell those, even at Publix, the little Yorkshire candles. So, and then at Yom Kippur too, usually like the major holiday, you light a Yorkshire candle.
And just one last question in regards to holidays before we move on. Can you tell us why there are a certain amount of days of Hanukkah and what the days mean, and about lighting the menorah?
Yeah, well, Hanukkah and a lot of the Jewish holidays are there's a lot of numerology in Judaism, and there's a lot of different explanations for some of it, but it seems like a lot of things are, 7 days or 8 days, and 7 days of the creation, to God to create the earth. And that's why when you look, the actual Hanukkah menorah it's not really a menorah, it's actually called a Hanukkah. The menorah is the 7-branched menorah, like those. Those are not Hanukkah. That's a menorah, and that is symbolic of the 7 days of creation. So whereas the Hanukkah has 8 and actually an extra 9, which is the Shamas. And the reason for the 8 days of Hanukkah was the miracle that the oil, that when the temple was destroyed, that there was the oil should not have lasted 8 days, but it lasted 8 days.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how come Hanukkah is 8 days.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Easter and Passover seem to coincide. Well, obviously, but
okay. Passover is a very big holiday for us. I mean, like I said, much bigger than Hanukkah, which was the destruction of the second temple, and there was a big battle. The Maccabees fought an army that was much larger, much bigger, and kind of there's, we're not really supposed to celebrate like a battle that we won, that, God would want us to do that, but it's more celebrating the miracle of and they call it the Festival of Lights. Whereas Passover is our exodus from Egypt.
8 crazy nights, as Adam Sandler says.
So what Passover is all about is the exodus from Egypt. The Jews were slaves and kept as slaves in Egypt by Pharaoh, and then God descended upon Pharaoh with the plagues, and finally Pharaoh had enough. There were, all these plagues that were, killing people, his people. So finally he said enough and, told the Jews to go.
Yeah.
So Passover is celebrating that. It has nothing, that happens to fall in,
it just,
spring, but that's, when the Torah says we celebrate it. So it is the Exodus from Egypt is what Passover celebrates.
And
our freedom. So it's a big
big
freedom. It's about freedom. It's about our freedom, getting our freedom.
And can you talk about what happened on the doors?
that was one of the plagues where, well, the Jewish people marked their doors because one of the plagues was the slaying of the firstborn. So, like, I think they marked it with like blood or something on the doors of the Jewish people, so God would pass over those doors and not slay the firstborn of the Jewish people. Leaving the stone.
So Cindy asked my cousin what leaving stones on a grave site means, and I think that's actually really nice.
Yeah.
So
basically, leaving the stones at a gravesite is just so that signifying I was here to visit you. It's not any major commandment by God to do that. How that came to be in terms of someone doing that, but the stones is just a symbolic thing that Jewish people have been doing, to say, I'm here, and I came to see you. Yeah.
So now as we move on to the hallway and the history of the synagogue, there's a lot of history with my family here as well.
Yeah, I was like, I know your grandfather somewhere.
And that's
It wasn't-
my
yeah.
grandfather.
So he was men's club president. Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah. I thought he was also. Remember, I said I think your grandfather's here, but is it just my grandfather? So this is our great grandmother, and see, this is her. So they created these for the 100th year anniversary, and my Aunt Barbara actually helped make these. And my sister and brother. No, we're not that one. Not in the 50s. I'm sorry, we're in the 60s.
This is Cindy. This is my grandfather's mother.
And this is my grandfather. They were doing some silly thing for men's club, and he dressed up as a woman. And
Explain.
I forget the whole story of what they were doing, but that's my grandfather.
And as we are traveling down to 1960,
60, and this is the one I met. See my brother. There I am. I'm right there. And that's on the steps which was a beautiful, old synagogue, but, they moved out because the neighborhood was getting rough.
That's the elevator. Hold on. She put everything.
So that, so then they were starting in the 60s. We moved here. That's when they're constructing this. But that's the Palm Avenue building where I started.
in the 70s. We don't have much to say about the 70s, huh? We forgot all about the 70s because we were too busy doing things we shouldn't be doing.
What was that?
Let's skip on over to the 80s.
On over to the 80s. Where we were married and having children. There we are. Nope, 70s.
And who are these people?
That's actually Mimi Weiss. Do you know Mimi
Uh-huh.
Weiss?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not
Hannah
sure who
tutored
that
me
is.
and
Yeah.
helped me with Hebrew.
Yeah, that's Mimi Weiss.
When my
And they're-
grandfather was
they-
dropping me off at Rabbi Broad's house every
Yeah.
weekend.
It looks like they're putting macaroons on plates. So this is Passover, something they're doing for Passover, obviously. It could be at the Seder. The synagogue will have a Seder too on the second night. So it could be they were doing that. It doesn't have a caption on it, so I'm not sure.
And on to the 80s for real.
Yeah. And this was very horrible. We had a rabbi that was killed in the Sioux City, Iowa plane crash, which was horrible because he was set to name Allison. I waited for a really long time to do a baby naming because I wanted him to do it, and then he passed away. So, and he and his wife and two of his kids were on the plane. The kids survived, and the parents were killed. It's horrible. Yeah. So I know exactly when that was, 1989, because that's the year that Allison was born. Yeah. So. And then I thought my grandmother was in some of these, but yeah. There were adult women. Women were not typically bat mitzvahed until like my era. So this is my grandmother did a b'nai mitzvah. So that's what that was like her b'nai mitzvah group. So, and that's what all these women, people did too. So they did adult. They call it b'nai when it's a group of people. Then it's b'nai mitzvah, whereas it's a bar mitzvah for one person. So they do adult b'nai mitzvah classes.
All right.
Okay, as we walk into the sanctuary, Judaism used to kind of be a very sexist religion, but now women, at least in conservative and reform, do almost everything men do. But the head coverings typically were only required of men, and it's just as respect for God. So when you walk in the sanctuary, you must have a head covering, all men. And a lot of Orthodox, women do too. Any women that go up on the sanctuary. So it's a respect for God, and you won't necessarily see them doing that in Reform Synagogue. The talit, anyone who has been bar or bat mitzvah can wear a talit, but you're supposed to have been bar or bat mitzvah. And these these fringes are called tzitzit, and there's supposed to be 613 of them, which represents the 613 mitzvot in the synagogue, which are the kind of the rules we live by, the things God wants us to do, the good deeds. Mitzvot are good deeds. So this is, you say this prayer before you.
And then when the men pass away, they're usually buried in them?
No,
No.
not necessarily. Actually, in Jewish burial, some might want to be buried with their talit, but the ritual Jewish is you're wrapped in shrouds, which is, like cotton pants and a shirt. So no. People get married under these. I've never heard of it part of the burial.
Okay. Just asking for educational purposes?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And again, people have reformed the ritual burial laws to fit themselves in the modern world.
And we are going to end our
interview.
Our interview.
There you go.
We're going to end our interview with a blessing. And if you can let us know what the name of the blessing is.
Okay, this blessing is called the Hamotzi, and it's the blessing we say before we eat. And I'll say it in English, I'll say it in Hebrew, and then I'll say it in English. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem mi ha'oretz. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth.
And thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview. We've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody watching it will learn a lot.